Well, all right. So when they asked me if I wanted to give a bio, I always, really kind of build it up because I love to hear people talk about me. So that was great, Angie. I appreciate it. I mean, I only came just to hear you talk about me. That's really awesome. So as Angie pointed out, I was able to escape the Pentagon, and early on when John Kubinick, where's John at, by the way? Here somewhere. Okay, he's on the front row there. When John asked me to do this, I asked him where it was at, and then I thought to myself, why do I care? As long as it's not in Washington, I'm in. I'll do it. And so it's really an honor. It's really a privilege to do this, to be here with you and with the Warner Robins community. Senator Nunn, thank you so much for the time last night and just having the conversation. And with all of you I got a chance to meet with last night. It was really phenomenal. And it's phenomenal being here this morning. I couldn't be here all morning because I don't get to get out as often as I would like. They hold us hostage up there, in case you haven't heard. And so when I get an opportunity to go see the world's best airmen, I don't miss it. And so I spent time this morning with the airmen at Warner Robins and some of the different program offices and just having conversations and frankly just reassuring them that this is a time of great consequence and we're going to get through it together. We absolutely are. We're just going to reprogram the way we think. We're going to put our head down and we're going to focus on the mission and we're going to get it done. And so sometimes they can read about it, but I'd rather tell them firsthand. So with that, those of you who know me, I'm not big. I feel bad because they put this big fancy speech in my book and I read it and I realize at the last minute that's not what I want to say at all. And so at about 4:30 this morning, that was the epiphany that I had. And I decided what I think we need to talk about is something a little different. And so what I was thinking about this morning is pretty simple. I was reflecting on all of the challenges we have as a nation and as an Air Force. And I was thinking about all the things that I deal with every single day with my teammates in the Pentagon. And one of the things that we constantly keep out in front of us is this. To win a fight, you have to sustain the fight. You have to sustain the fight. And in many ways, we've kind of lost our way on that front. If you look at just as a totality as to where the readiness of our aircraft are, the amount of time and energy it takes to get aircraft through our depots and how much resourcing it requires. So we have to find a way to sustain that fight, not just the fight today, but for the fight of the future. The second point, as I'm thinking through this, is the reality that we have grasped inside the AOR that is Washington, D.C. And it's not just about politics, it's about the global landscape, and that's just simply this. It's not business as usual. The global landscape has completely changed as a function of time since I've been wearing the uniform, since many of you have been involved with the Department of Defense, and even policy aspects of it. It's all changed. And one of the things that we reflect on often is that the world we live in now, compared to the world we lived in 20, 25 years ago, is that we can't just pick up our kit and just move down range. We just can't do that anymore. That's not the way this works anymore. It's a very complicated environment. We're dealing with things like you all hear the words tyranny of distance. A tyranny of distance is complicated by water. It's even further complicated by the fact that it's contested. It's a different world. It is absolutely a different world. And so knowing that it's not business as usual. The other piece of it is as we think about readiness, and I'll get to some points here as I kind of thought through how I wanted to lay this out, is we have pockets of success. And I know that, in the program there, it talks about how I'm going to talk about all that technology, and I will. In fact, many of my comments will frame what I assume will be the panel discussion. But we use words like AI and cold spray and additive manufacturing. But have we embraced them? Have we truly inculcated them into our system where that they can actually have a grasp on how we execute sustaining our platforms and our capabilities? Or have we just dabbled on the fringe and used whatever extra dollars we have to try to push that down the road? I think many of the people in this room know exactly the answer to that question. And this is where we have to start thinking differently. So if you remember anything Tom Miller, who many of you know, who's a great partner and friend of mine, who's currently the Air Force A4. He and I are working a task, and I'll probably weave that in here in a second, for the Vice Chief on how we tackle this problem that we call readiness from a capability perspective. And the thing that I always go back to is that we have to view this readiness challenge through the lens of lethality. And that's going to be the foundation of how we approach this conversation today. Because I will tell you, if you view this problem through the lens of lethality, it's going to change the way you look at it from every perspective. And so we have to get our platforms ready while they're at home. And we have to find a way to sustain. And this is a word we haven't used in a very long time, reconstitute. We have to find a way to reconstitute. That's the type of fights we're talking about with a peer rival. Those are words we haven't used in a very long time. And here's something that even hurts even more. We're going to have an industrial base that can do it. We got to have the national capacity to achieve that reconstitution. And we have to rely on things like our depots. We have to rely on things like different technologies. We have to rely on our relationship with industry. So as you think about all of that, think about viewing the challenge that is sustaining our Air Force through the lens of lethality. So how do we do all of this in a future where we carry our current fielded systems, our capacity? We're carrying all of that load to make sure those systems are ready, but yet at the same time, we're introducing new systems that are very different, that are designed differently, that are completely different in the way we employ them and how we bring them into our force. And so as we think about that, there are a couple things, the way I view the problem, the things that I think we should be looking at. So with that, I'm going to go through a few here. The first one is going to be so painfully simple, it'll almost be disappointing. We resource the fight. We have to resource the fight. And I'll tell you, it's interesting, we inside the Air Force, we continuously talk about the need for more resources. And I will tell you, I'm not sure that's the case. I think our nation needs more Air Force. That's the difference. And that obviously comes at an expense. But what the Air Force, what the nation needs us to do, what it's asking us to do, it needs more Air Force. And so, again, I talk about both preparing for the fight at home and downrange when we're actually in the fight. You know, I agree with everyone. You know, it's often been said, and I will continue to say, war is not inevitable, but deterrence isn't cheap. And we forget that piece of the puzzle. Also, we have to continue to focus on and reimagine, and I don't want to get too far into this because I'm hoping this is going to be some of the hard questions that we get into when we get into the panel, but we have to reimagine what our depots do, what role they play. And I want that to settle for a minute because I feel, and I think that those in this crowd, we have to recognize that a depot isn't an independent function among the national enterprise that maintains and sustains the success of the United States Air Force. It is part of the national capacity. We have to draw it into that national capacity. We have to leverage that national capacity in different ways. General Kubinick and I have had numerous conversations about how far outside of the box we could push that. I'll tell you what I fear. I fear we won't push it outside of the box. We'll wait for the crisis. We'll wait for the crisis to come, and then we'll throw everything at the solution, and we'll hope for the best. We don't have to do that. We can choose different. The next thing, and this is one that is always a little politically untenable in terms of just the budget process, we must rethink and more closely evaluate how we balance modernization versus sustainment. There, I said it. The acquisition guy actually said it. We have to rethink how we balance modernization and sustainment. We have to understand that while that next piece of kit is really, really important, if I put that piece of kit on an airplane that cannot get off the ramp because the engines have timed out or I can't get the parts that I need, I've got some really cool kit, but it's a static display. It's not going to help us. So we really have to rethink that. And that's really, really hard, and that's where Tom Miller and I are working really hard. And you know this, and for too long, modernization has come up at the expense of sustainment. I mean, we know that. We have chosen that as a nation and as Air Force. But the thing we're starting to realize, and General Breedlove will probably laugh out loud because I'm acting like I'm having an epiphany, is that the airplane gets a vote. And even since you were in uniform, sir, these airplanes have been voting for a while. We are finding new and innovative ways to break airplanes. I assure you. One of the things, as you think about this rebalance of how you might approach this, Tom Miller and I have been looking at the Navy, looking at other places of how you kind of shift this transition of readiness. And one of the things we're looking very closely at is how do you subordinate readiness in the operational chain? How do we look at ways where if I have a fleet of airplanes in a location and 3 of those airplanes are down, how do I make sure the vice chief knows about that? Because I guarantee you, if we start sustaining that way, we subordinate some of these decisions down to the tail level, we'll start solving problems really, really fast. And we'll start reprioritizing. Now, we're a much larger fleet in terms of the total number of aircraft we have and so forth, but at the same time, we have to start thinking through that lens. We have to really put the spotlight on where the operational disconnect is and making sure that we can get the leaders in place who can make resourcing decisions and can drive that to the outcomes that we want. Otherwise, we will continue carrying the mission-capable rates that we all are so fond of talking about, of which I won't even bring up here. The next piece is something that I spend an enormous amount of time thinking about, and if for no other reason, I want you to know that we think a lot about it. And that's how we bake in logistics, supportability, maintainability, and sustainability from the very beginning. How do we not do what we've always done, where we separate ourselves between the acquirer and the operator? And when I say operator, I mean operator plus maintainer in the entire enterprise. And we deliver the product at the end, and then we hope we got it right. You know, there was recently a letter that was written, and I won't go into detail as to who wrote it or why it was written because it's not important. But in that letter, there's a comment that's made of how we should be viewing the acquiring and essentially the sustaining community as warfighting functions. And too often, this community gets viewed as the business side of the Air Force. I was telling the F-15 team this morning, you know, we deliver capability operators because everyone around that table is a warfighter. And if they think different, fail to deliver a squadron of F-15s and see whether or not there's an operational impact. I assure you, what we do is a warfighting function. So probably somebody out there has a bingo card. I'm about, 15 minutes in before I said CCA for the first time, so I said it there. I hope everybody's happy. And if there's any media out there, they'll be very happy. They'll start writing right now. And so that is where I think from a combat collaborative aircraft perspective, we have spent an enormous amount of time understanding how you deploy these things forward. How do you maintain them? How do you sustain them? Do you need them in a depot? Do you have the national capacity to produce them at a rate you need to, both to fight and to reconstitute? Those are tough questions. How do you bring simplicity back into the design that you can actually do those things? Right? We have gotten to a place that things are so complex, it takes forever to reconstitute. So now we're in a place where we have decision space to bound the problem tightly enough, have some regrets early on, but then the ability to reconstitute at a pace that is much, much faster than what we normally would. Because it's what's going to be asked of us as a nation and as an Air Force. The next piece is how to drive technology into the enterprise. And, you know, I can't have the conversation here without actually bringing in all of the things that we are doing. We're doing here at Robins. We're doing at Tinker, right? The rearm labs, all the different labs we have out there leaning forward. We understand the technology. That is, I mean, everybody in this room uses some form of AI, whether you actually know it or not. We understand the technology. We understand additive manufacturing. We understand what it's capable of doing. Are we an Air Force that's able to adopt it? Are we an Air Force that's able to adopt it and inculcate it into the very fabric of how we do our business? That's the question. Folks, we are dabbling on the fringes when we need to be in the middle of the field. It's two sports analogies I just crossed there. I don't know if anybody caught that. So I think that's really important. The newer airplanes, and I learned this from B-21, my time, my wife compared that program to having another child because it consumed all of us in my family because it was so important in the nation. But one of the things that was most important about that journey is I never went anywhere without the maintainers. Because I know that they know. They were the ones out on the line sustaining the previous versions of these airplanes. They're the ones who understand what the hard problems are. They're the ones that understand what the setbacks are in doing some of the maintenance and some of the sustainability in the very challenging environmental conditions. We have adopted that across the enterprise. We're finding new and different ways to make sure we get those voices inside the decisions we make from an acquisition perspective. And so when you think about that, how do we adopt some of these technologies? How do we make sure the maintainers have a say? How do we make sure they help us, the sustainment community helps us steer this in the right direction? CCA is going to be important in that because we're going to lean on that more than we ever have. And we're giving them a voice. And so the last piece that I can't really overlook, I think, is the ACE piece. And for those of you who don't know what that is, it's Agile Combat Employment. And you know, you can hear different versions of what that means, right? But the bottom line is the ability to be agile. Embracing the reality that we're not going to have sanctuary bases like we've always fought. That's not the way things are going to happen anymore. And so how does the logistics and sustainment community adapt to that? How do we embrace it? How do we rethink the way we're going to go about this fight? And so we're spending an enormous amount of time on how we employ that. The term that we often use is ACE with agility, because if you try to put it too tightly in a box, you're just so committed to how you're going to do it. You know, and I remember one time I was talking with General Kelly when he was the ACC commander, and his words were, you know, some things you just need to put in the hands of the captains and let them do it, right? And we'll figure some of this stuff out. And I think this is that agility piece we're going to have to put with Agile Combat Employment. And so going back to that technology piece, I want to run out the list of a couple things, and then I want to bring one up that I think is going to surprise some of you. The first one, you know, we talked about the AI, the artificial intelligence. We talked about things like cold spray and additive manufacturing, digital printing in an austere environment, right? Is it possible? Of course it's possible. Is it risky? Of course it's risky. Digital twins. I know, John, you have a strong relationship, and there's relationships here with NIAR, the National Institute for Aeronautical Research, right? Digital twinning our airplanes and making sure we understand what they're capable of and what the left and right limits are in terms of how much long they have, how much life they have. Understanding how we can own some of the IP that we don't already own. And then the last piece is, I think, we have to make sure as we forward deploy that our sustainment and logistics enterprise is tied into the DAF battle network. We have to move away from one-off systems. This is data that has to be readily available to the commanders in real time. They've got to know what they have, where they have it, and what it means in terms of how they prosecute the fight. So that DAF Battle Network, you all heard about it, ABMS, project, whatever version you've heard, we cannot have people looking in from the outside as we try to prosecute this. And so making sure we integrate that piece. And I'm going to close out with something that General Breedlove said to me last night. I wasn't here for his talk this morning, but I'm sure he talked very highly of the acquisition community, because he often does, right? He talked about the valley of death in the acquisition community. It's a real thing. It's absolutely a real thing. There are great ideas, great capabilities out there we have not been able to get across the line. I'll say it. It could be resourcing. Could it be it doesn't have a champion? Could be somebody doesn't like it, right? All those things are true. But I will tell you, from a logistics and sustainment perspective, we've got to find a way to close that valley of death. That's where we need to focus our resources and attention, because there are capabilities there that we can adopt inside our Air Force. And I will tell you, if you look at the reoptimization efforts that we have ongoing, we're changing the way the voices come out from a readiness perspective. We're changing the way that demand signal comes into the larger enterprise and how it informs not only what our priorities are, but what our resourcing strategy is. And so with that, I'm going to wrap up and say thank you again for letting me be a part of this today. If you, like I started this, if you leave with nothing, just need to know that we as an Air Force, where I sit, well, actually I mostly stand, but where I stand, we view this challenge through the lens of lethality. And we're going to have to continue to do it that way to get serious about what we need to get done. It's easy to say that I stand up here in a position still in uniform, in a position of decision authority. But I've been around long enough to know, like I told my team this morning, that the people who are going to make this happen are the people that is actually sitting out there, sitting at the tables around this room. So I challenge you, just like Will Roper did last year. Push these things off the fringe, get them onto the green or onto the field, however you want to put it. Challenge the status quo. Embrace the idea that it's not business as usual. And constantly remember that through the lens of lethality, the only way to sustain a fight is to resource a fight. Thank you very much.